My son stood before his class with a toy truck. He said one line. The teacher went pale. They called me. "Ma'am, we called the police." I arrived. Officers surrounded my boy. One said, "Do you know he just confessed?" When the phone rang at 12:30, I apologized to the customer as usual for distracting them. Working as a cashier at Freshmart taught me to apologize for everything. For the slow scanner, for the long line, for the fact that we were out of 1% milk. "This is your son's school," said an unfamiliar female voice. "You need to come immediately." My heart sank somewhere below my ribs. Ethan had never caused any trouble. 5 years, and not a single call from school. Always obedient, always quiet. What happened? Is he hurt? "No, ma'am." "But we had to call the police. Please come as soon as possible." The police? My vision blurred. The shift supervisor, Stan, just looked at my face and waved me toward the exit. I grabbed my bag and the keys to our old Honda, my hands shaking so much that I missed the ignition twice. It was a 15-minute drive to the school, but it felt like hours. Terrible images swirled in my head. Ethan had always been so careful, so proper. He even put his toys away in neat order. Blake always praised him for it. A real man doesn't leave his things lying around. There were 2 police cars in the school parking lot. My legs felt like jelly. The secretary led me down the hallway, and in the principal's office, I saw a scene that made my blood run cold. Ethan was sitting on a small chair, clutching his favorite toy truck, a red Kenworth, a gift from Blake on his 4th birthday, to his chest. 3 adults stood around him, the principal, Mrs. Chelmans, the teacher, Miss Rodriguez, and a police officer, a tall black man with kind eyes. "Mommy!" Ethan rushed toward me and I hugged him, breathing in the familiar scent of children's shampoo. "Madam," the officer leaned toward me, "do you understand that your son just confessed?" I didn't understand anything. I looked at his serious face, at the concerned expressions of the other adults. Confessed? To what? Miss Rodriguez wiped her sweaty palms on her skirt. A young teacher, working here for the 2nd year. She usually smiles when I come to pick up Ethan. Today the children talked about their families. They showed photos and shared memories. Ethan raised his hand and said, She looked at the officer. He said, "We run away from home when it beeps. Dad yells at Mom," the police officer repeated. And then he added, "But I always take my truck." The world spun around me. I understood. My God, I understood what he meant. "It's not what you think," I blurted out. "We have a faulty fire alarm at home. It goes off when I make toast. And my husband, he survived a fire as a child. When the alarm goes off, he yells at me to take Ethan and go to the neighbors, just in case." The officer wrote down my words in his notebook. The director looked at me doubtfully. "Madam, your son said, 'Let's run away,'" the police officer emphasized, and he described it as something regular. I crouched down next to Ethan and took his hands. "Sweetie, tell the ladies and gentlemen about the alarm at home." "Do you remember when it beeps?" "When Mom makes toast," Ethan said quietly, and Dad says, hurry up, let's go to Aunt Linda's," and he says it loudly because he's afraid." "Afraid of what?" asked the principal. "Fire," Ethan replied simply, like in the cartoon about the dragon. Only real fire scares Dad more. I felt the tension in the room ease a little. But the officer didn't put away his notebook. "We'll need to check your house, ma'am." "And talk to your husband, of course. Of course, they can't just take my word for it." A 5-year-old told his class about escaping and screaming, and now our family is under suspicion. I called Blake at work. He was working as a mechanic at a service station, and when I explained the situation, there was silence on the line. "My God," he finally said. "I'll be right there." We waited in the principal's office. Ethan told the officer about his truck, how it could carry little cars, how the back opened up. It was a normal conversation between a 5-year-old boy and an adult, but every word was weighed and analyzed. Blake arrived 20 minutes later, covered in grease and looking worried. tall, broad-shouldered, with the hands of a mechanic and eyes that always hid some kind of fear. He hugged Ethan and looked at me guiltily. "Sir," the officer addressed him, "your son told the class about his regular escapes from home. Could you explain?" Blake clenched his jaw. It had always been difficult for him to talk about what happened when he was 7, about the fire in their trailer, about how he, his younger brother, and his mother barely managed to escape, about how the sound of a smoke alarm still made him panic. "We have an old house," he began slowly. "The sensor reacts to everything. When it goes off, I want to make sure my family is okay. So we go outside, to the neighbors, until I check to see if something is really on fire." "Why does your wife call it screaming?" Blake looked at me, and I saw that familiar shame in his eyes. "Because I yell," he said quietly. "When I hear that sound, I can't control my voice. It's stronger than me." The officer nodded, taking notes. The director looked at us with understanding, not suspicion. "Sir, your son said you yell at his mother." "I don't yell at her." Blake rubbed his face with his palm. "I yell at her. So she'll get on with it. But to a child, I guess it sounds the same." We all went home together. Our family, the officer, and the school social worker. Our rented house looked particularly pitiful in light of the situation. Peeling paint on the porch, a rusty mailbox, grass that Blake had been meaning to mow but never got around to. In the kitchen, the officer looked at our smoke detector, a yellow circle under the ceiling with a flashing red light. "That's a really old model," he said. "They're known for false alarms." I put 2 slices of bread in the toaster, and a minute later, a piercing siren sounded throughout the house. Blake instantly tensed, his face contorting. "Ashley!" he shouted. "Grab Ethan! Quickly!" Ethan automatically grabbed his truck and headed for the door. I took his hand. We went out into the yard and stood there until Blake turned off the sensor and checked the kitchen. "There it is," said the social worker. "Now I understand." The officer closed his notebook. "It's clear. But I would advise replacing that sensor, and maybe talk to your son about how to talk about family matters at school." When everyone left, the 3 of us stayed in the kitchen. Ethan played with his truck on the floor while Blake and I looked at each other. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" "For making our son think I yell at you. For this damn sensor. For not being able to control myself when it beeps." I walked over to him and put my hand on his shoulder. I could feel the tension in his muscles under my fingers. "Blake, you're not to blame for what happened to you as a child. But I am to blame for what happened today." Ethan looked up from his game. "Mom, did I do something bad?" I sat down next to him. "No, sweetie. You didn't do anything bad. It's just that sometimes adults understand words differently. Will Dad stop yelling now?" Blake knelt down next to us. "Dad will try to speak more quietly," he said, "and we'll buy a new sensor that doesn't beep all the time. Okay?" Ethan nodded and went back to his game. I looked at my husband and thought about how one innocent comment from a child could turn a whole life upside down, and that maybe it was time to change something in our home. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of rain on the window and the feeling that something had changed forever. Blake was already up. He always woke up before me as if sleep was his enemy. I found him in the kitchen, standing by the coffee maker and staring at the damn smoke detector. "I'll go buy a new one today," he said without turning around. "Okay," I replied, even though I knew he had been promising to change the batteries in the flashlight for a month, and the detector was something more complicated. Ethan appeared in the kitchen with his hair tousled and his truck in his hands. After yesterday, he hadn't let go of it for a minute. "Mom, will they talk about me at school today?" My heart sank. A 5-year-old shouldn't have to worry about such things. "No, sweetie." Everyone has forgotten already, but I knew I was lying. In a small town like ours, news spreads faster than wildfire. By lunchtime, the whole school would know that the police had come to Ethan Collier's house. When I brought Ethan to school, Miss Rodriguez met us at the entrance. She spoke more softly than usual, and I realized she had been instructed on how to deal with a child from a problem family. "Don't worry, Mrs. Collier," she said. "Ethan will be fine." But her smile was too bright, too forced. I kissed my son and drove to work, feeling the eyes of the other parents on me. At Fresh Mart, Stan asked if everything was okay, and I nodded without going into detail. But at 10 o'clock, a woman with a folder and a child services badge appeared in the store. "Mrs. Collier?" "I'm Deborah Gill, a social worker. Could we talk?" Stan let me take a break, and we sat in a corner of the staff cafeteria. Mrs. Gill was about 45 with short gray hair and the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much. "This is standard procedure," she said, opening her folder. "After yesterday's incident, we are required to conduct a family assessment." An incident, as if my son had done something terrible, rather than simply telling the truth as a 5-year-old understands it. "Tell me about your family life," she asked. "How long have you been married to Mr. Collier?" 6 years. We met when I was 19. "And your parents? Are they supportive?" The old painful question. I clasped my hands on my knees. "My parents died 5 years ago. Car accident." Mrs. Gill nodded sympathetically, making notes. "I'm sorry." "What about Mr. Collier's relatives?" "His mother lives in Florida." "We don't talk much." "Friends? People you can count on?" I fell silent. Friends. When I met Blake, I had friends. Tina from college, Melissa from work at the cafe. But Blake always found reasons why I shouldn't see them. "Tina's a bad influence on you. She's too frivolous." "Melissa is married. She doesn't need to hang out in bars with you." "Why do you want to go out?" "Aren't you interested in me?" And gradually, I stopped calling, stopped initiating meetings. And when Ethan was born, there was no time left for friends at all. "We don't have many close friends," I said finally. "We're a family. We're enough for each other." Mrs. Gill looked at me as if she understood much more than I was saying. "How does your husband react to stress?" He gets tense, but not because he's angry. He experienced trauma as a child and it still affects him. "You mentioned a fire?" "Yes. He was 7 years old. Their house burned down. They barely escaped with their lives." "And how does that manifest itself now?" I didn't know how to explain. How could I explain that Blake checks all the locks twice every morning? That he never lets me light candles? That even the smell of burnt toast can make him run out of the room? "He's very careful with fire," I said. "And when he hears the smoke alarm, he panics." "Tell me what happens when he panics." "Well, he raises his voice. He talks fast. He tries to get us all out of the house as quickly as possible." "How often does that happen?" I thought about it. About 5 times in the last month. Every time it was because of toast or when I was cooking something in the oven. Once a week. Maybe a little more often. Mrs. Gill wrote down every word I said, and I felt like our life was turning into a case file. "How does your son react to these situations?" "He's used to it. He knows to take his toy and go to the neighbors. For him, it's like fire drill practice." "Who are the neighbors?" "Linda and Mike Parsons. They've lived next door for the last 10 years. Linda sometimes babysits Ethan." Mrs. Gill nodded and closed her notebook. "I need to talk to your husband separately, and to Ethan, and to your neighbors. Is that necessary?" "Unfortunately, yes. But there are no official charges yet. We're just gathering information." That evening, when Blake came home from work, I told him about my conversation with social services. He listened silently, clenching and unclenching his fists. "They think I'm a cruel father," he said finally. "They don't think anything. They're just doing their job." "Ashley, don't you understand? One word from them and they can take Ethan away." I hadn't thought about that, or rather, I didn't want to think about it. But now it was out loud, and fear washed over me like a cold wave. "That won't happen," I said. "We haven't done anything wrong." "Who's going to believe us?" Blake walked over to the refrigerator and took out a beer. He usually only drinks on weekends, but lately it's been happening more often. Mrs. Gill seems smart, I tried to reassure him. She'll understand. Smart? He turned to me. Ashley, she writes down every word we say. She looks for reasons to prove we're bad parents. You're exaggerating, and you're underestimating it. Blake sat down at the table and rubbed his face with his hands. If you had kept a closer eye on what Ethan was saying. What do you mean? You should have explained to him that he shouldn't tell everyone about our family affairs. I felt anger rising in my chest. Rarely, very rarely did I allow myself to get angry at Blake, but now his words struck me. He's 5 years old. He doesn't know what family matters are. That's exactly why you should have taught him. Maybe the problem isn't that he's telling people, but that he has something to tell? Blake raised his head sharply. His face took on an expression I knew all too well, a mixture of pain and anger. So it's my fault. That's not what I meant. No, you said exactly what you think, that I'm ruining our family's life with my problems. Blake? Fine, now you're against me too. He went out to the backyard, and I heard the garage door open. When he's upset or angry, he goes there to work on his motorcycle, an old Harley that he's been restoring for 3 years now. I stayed in the kitchen alone, looking at my half-finished beer and thinking about why I'm always the first to apologize. Why do I always have to smooth things over, look for compromises, pretend that everything is fine? Ethan came down the stairs in his pajamas, pulling his toy truck behind him. Mom, why is Dad angry? He's not angry, sweetie. He's just upset. Because of what I said at school? I pulled him close and kissed him on the top of his head. His hair smelled of baby shampoo and sleep. No, sweetie. It's not your fault. Sometimes grown-ups get upset about things that have nothing to do with children. But even a 5-year-old knew that wasn't entirely true. The next day, Mrs. Gill came to our house. Blake and I cleaned the house like never before. He even mowed the lawn and painted the cracked board on the porch. Mrs. Gill looked around the house, talked to Ethan in his room, and then met with Blake in the kitchen while I was upstairs with my son. When she left, Blake looked exhausted. What did she ask? I asked. About my child. About how I control my anger. About our relationship. And what did you say? The truth. That I love my family and would never hurt them. That my problems with smoke detectors are in the past, not the present. Did she believe you? Blake shrugged. I don't know. She says she'll make a final decision in a week. The week dragged on endlessly. I felt like we were being watched all the time. At work, my colleagues treated me more cautiously, as if I might explode at any moment. At school, the teacher spoke to Ethan in a particularly gentle tone. When Mrs. Gill called, I was shaking so badly that I could barely hold the phone. We're closing the case, she said, but there's a condition. What is it? Your family must undergo family therapy. 10 sessions. It will help you learn to communicate better and cope with stressful situations. Therapy. I never thought we would need it. But the alternative was worse. Okay, I said. We agree. When I told Blake, he was silent for a long time. So we're officially a problem family, he said finally. No. We're just a family that needs help. But deep down, I knew he was right. Something in our life had gone wrong, and now we would have to fix it under the supervision of strangers. That evening, after Ethan fell asleep, we sat in the living room watching TV without looking at the screen. Blake held the remote, flipping through channels randomly. Do you think we're bad parents? He asked suddenly. No, I replied quickly, maybe too quickly. Then why do I feel like we're doing everything wrong? I didn't know how to answer, because I had been asking myself the same question every day for the past 5 years. Dr. Martha Walsh's office was located in an old brick building in the city center, between a dental clinic and a gift shop. As we climbed the creaky stairs to the second floor, Blake muttered something under his breath about wasted money. $200 an hour for some woman to tell us we're doing it wrong, he whispered in my ear. It's covered by insurance. I reminded him, although I was just as nervous as he was. Ethan held my hand and looked around with curiosity. The hallway was decorated with paintings of bright, abstract splashes of color, and muffled voices came from the rooms. Dr. Walsh met us at her door. She was a woman in her 50s with warm brown eyes and silvery hair pulled back into a low ponytail. She was wearing a plain denim shirt and dark pants, not at all what I expected from a psychotherapist. "Are you the Collier family? Please come in." Her office was cozy. Soft chairs, bookshelves, toys in the corner for children. On the table was a box of tissues and a jug of water. "So," Dr. Walsh sat down across from us, "tell me what brought you here." Blake and I exchanged glances. Who should start? And how could we explain the whole situation without sounding like a hopeless case? "Our son was having problems at school," Blake began in a formal tone. "He said something that was misunderstood." What exactly did he say? I took the floor because I felt Blake was going to shut down again. He told the class that we run away from home when it beeps and Dad yells at Mom, but really, he was talking about our smoke detector. My husband survived a fire as a child, so when the alarm goes off, he gets nervous. "I see. And you, Ethan," Dr. Walsh turned to her son, "do you want to tell me about your truck?" Ethan clutched his toy tighter. "It's red, and it can carry other cars, and when it beeps at home, I always take it with me." "Why that one?" "Because it's the strongest, and if there's a real fire, it will protect me." Dr. Walsh nodded as if it made perfect sense. "How do you feel when you hear it beeping?" Ethan thought for a moment. "A little scared." Then Dad says, "Quick, quick." And Mom takes me by the hand, and we go to Aunt Linda's. And what happens at Aunt Linda's? We sit on her porch and wait until Dad makes sure everything is okay. And Aunt Linda gives me cookies. I never thought about how it looked from a child's perspective. For us, it was just a precaution. But for Ethan, it was something scary that happened several times a month. "Ethan, have you ever told your mom or dad that you're scared?" The boy shook his head. "No, because Mom will be upset. She always gets upset when I tell the truth. It's like being punched in the stomach." "When does he tell the truth? About what?" Dr. Walsh noticed my reaction. "Ashley, how do you understand Ethan's words?" I don't understand." "Ethan, what truth are you talking about?" My son looked at me with wide eyes. "Well, when I say I don't want to eat broccoli, you get upset. Or when I say I don't want to go to bed, or that I don't like it when Dad talks loudly." Oh my God, he thinks that upsetting me is bad, that it's better to stay silent than to say something that might upset me. "Sweetheart," I leaned toward him, "you can tell me the truth, even if it upsets me." "But then you'll feel guilty," Ethan said seriously. "Like when the alarm goes off, you always say, 'Sorry' to Dad." Blake looked sharply at me, then at his son. "Ethan, Mom isn't to blame for the alarm going off. But she says sorry. And when I spill juice, she says sorry for me. And when you come home late from work, she says sorry dinner's cold." Dr. Walsh was writing something in her notebook, and I could feel myself blushing. Did I really apologize all the time? For everything? "Ashley," Dr. Walsh said gently, "why do you think you apologize so often?" I didn't know how to answer. It seemed natural, to keep the peace, not cause trouble. "I just don't like conflict. It's easier to apologize and move on, even if you're not at fault." "Especially if I'm not at fault," I blurted out, "because if I'm at fault, then I need to change something. But if I'm not at fault, then I can just apologize and forget about it." Blake looked at me with a strange expression on his face. "I never thought about it that way," he said, "but you really do always apologize first." "Is that bad?" "It's not bad," Dr. Walsh interjected, "but it can create unhealthy patterns. When you constantly apologize, you take responsibility for other people's emotions, and Ethan notices that." She turned to her son. "Ethan, would you like to go play in that corner while the adults talk?" He nodded and went to the toys. I watched him carefully place his truck next to the other cars, but not let it out of his sight. "Blake," Dr. Walsh addressed her husband, "how do you feel when Ashley apologizes for things she's not responsible for?" He thought for a long time, at first relieved, like the conflict has been resolved, but then bad, because I know she's not to blame, and that makes me feel even more guilty. Guilty of what? Of creating an atmosphere where my wife is afraid to say what she really thinks. I looked at him in surprise. We had never talked about this openly. "You're not creating any atmosphere," I said. "That's just my personality." "No, Ashley, it's not. When we met, you were different. You argued with me. You had your own opinions." Dr. Walsh leaned forward. "What changed?" I tried to remember. When did I stop arguing with Blake? When did I start automatically agreeing with him? "When Ethan was born," I said finally. "Blake was so worried about him. He checked his breathing every 15 minutes. He didn't sleep. And I thought if I didn't add to his stress, it would be easier for him. And then it became a habit? I guess so. It's easier to agree than to argue, especially when he starts worrying about little things." Blake rubbed his face with his hands. "Little things. Ashley, they're not little things to me. When I hear the smoke alarm, I think we're all going to die. When Ethan coughs at night, I think of pneumonia. When you're late coming home from the store, I imagine a car accident. Why didn't you ever tell me this? Because it sounds crazy." Dr. Walsh interjected, "Blake, it's not crazy. It's post-traumatic stress. It's completely understandable after what you went through as a child. But that doesn't excuse what I'm doing to Ashley. To all of us. What do you do?" He was silent for a long time, watching Ethan drive his toy cars across the carpet. "I control everything. I check the locks 10 times. I forbid Ashley from burning candles. I get nervous when she goes somewhere without me, and when something doesn't go according to plan, I—" "Raise your voice?" "Yes, not out of anger, out of fear. But to them, it looks the same." I reached out and touched his hand. For the first time in months, I felt genuine understanding rather than pity for him. "We're all scared," I said, "just in different ways." Dr. Walsh nodded. "That's a great start. Now let's think about how you can change your usual reactions." For the next 40 minutes, we talked about practical things. How Blake could signal his anxiety to me without screaming. How I could express disagreement without fear of conflict. How we could explain to Ethan that his feelings were important. "Homework," Dr. Walsh said at the end of the session. "Blake, when you feel anxious about the smoke detector, say, 'I'm scared, help me make sure everything is okay.' Ashley, when you feel the urge to apologize automatically, stop and ask yourself, 'What am I apologizing for? What if the alarm really goes off?' Then you'll follow your plan. But stay calm." "Ethan," she said to her son, "can you tell Mom or Dad when you're scared?" Ethan nodded, holding his truck tightly. "But only if they won't get upset." "They won't get upset," Dr. Walsh assured him. "Right, Mom and Dad?" We nodded, and I hoped it was true. On the way home, Ethan fell asleep in his car seat, and Blake and I drove in silence. Finally, he spoke. "Do you think this will help?" "I don't know, but at least now I understand what we're doing wrong." "What are we doing right?" I looked at him. In the light of the setting sun, he looked younger, less tired. "We're trying. We're here, in this car, driving home together. That's something." That evening, as I was making dinner, the smoke alarm went off again. I expected Blake to yell, but he took a deep breath and said, "Ashley, I'm scared. Can you turn off the oven and check if everything is okay?" I turned off the oven, checked the kitchen, and returned to him. "It's fine. The chicken just burned a little on the bottom." "Thank you," he said quietly. It was a small word, but it meant a huge change. For the first time in many years, I didn't feel the need to apologize for the smoke detector. And Blake didn't yell. Ethan watched us from the living room. "Mom," he said, "it scares me when it beeps." "I know, sweetie. It scares us all. But we're together, and we'll take care of each other." He came up to me with the truck in his hands. "Can I leave it here in the kitchen?" "So it knows everything's okay, too?" "Of course," I said, and kissed him on the forehead. The little red truck stood on the windowsill next to the vase of plastic flowers. For the first time in months, Ethan let go of it willingly, and I realized that we were really starting to change. The new smoke detector cost $120, almost half of his weekly salary from Freshmart. But Blake insisted that it was an investment in our peace of mind. He installed it on Saturday morning after reading the instructions twice. "Look," he said to Ethan, showing him the small plastic device. "It has a test button. When you press it, it beeps once. That means it's working properly. If it beeps loudly and for a long time, that means there's smoke." Ethan nodded seriously, holding his truck. "Can I press the button?" "Sure. But first, warn your mom so she doesn't get scared." This was progress. Blake would never have let Ethan touch anything related to fire safety before. We also created a new evacuation plan. Dr. Walsh advised involving the whole family so that Ethan would feel like part of the team, not a victim of circumstances. "So," I said, spreading a large sheet of paper on the kitchen table, "let's draw our house." Ethan took a red pencil and began drawing squares. His house looked like a child's idea of a house. A triangular roof, square windows, a door in the middle. "Now," Blake said, "let's mark how we can get out of each room." I drew arrows from the doors and windows. Blake added notes. "Main exit, emergency exit through the window, meeting place by the mailbox." "Where's the truck?" Ethan asked. "The truck stays in the house," Blake said. "Remember what Dr. Walsh said? The most important thing is for people to be safe. You can buy new toys." Ethan looked sad. "But I don't want to buy a new one. I want this one." I sat down next to him. "Sweetie, what if we practice getting out really fast? So fast that we can take you in the truck with us." Blake looked at me doubtfully but didn't argue. "We can try," he said, "but only if it doesn't slow down the evacuation." We practiced 5 times. Blake pressed the sensor test button. I took Ethan's hand, he grabbed the truck, and we all walked to the door together. We didn't run. We walked quickly. 30 seconds, Blake timed. That's not bad. In the 4th therapy session, Dr. Walsh asked me, "Ashley, what did you do before you got married? What were your dreams?" I thought about it. It seemed like it was in another life. I wanted to be a hairdresser. I even started taking classes at college. And what happened? I met Blake, and then I got pregnant. I had to quit school and find a job that paid right away. "Would you like to go back to that now?" Blake frowned. "Why?" "She has a stable job. We can't afford to take risks." "I wasn't asking you," Dr. Walsh said gently. "Ashley?" I looked at my husband, then at the doctor. I don't know, maybe it's too late?" "I'm 25, I heard my voice say, as if it belonged to someone else. "It's not too late." Blake pressed his lips together. "Who will take care of Ethan? Who will pay for the classes?" "We can discuss that," Dr. Walsh said. "But first, it's important to understand what Ashley wants." I wanted so badly to go back to feeling like I had plans for the future when I thought of myself as more than just a mother and a wife. "Yes," I said firmly. "I want to finish the classes." Blake didn't talk to me that evening. He sat in the garage with his motorcycle until 11 o'clock. When he came back, I was lying in bed, reading an old beauty school brochure I found in a box under the bed. "Are you serious?" he asked as he undressed. "About what?" "About the classes. Ashley, we have a mortgage, bills, a child. We can't afford your hobbies. It's not a hobby. It's a profession. One you know nothing about." His words hit me like a slap in the face. In the past, I would have kept quiet, apologized, or found a compromise. But something in me had changed. How do you know what I understand and what I don't? Because I've known you for 6 years. No, I said, sitting up in bed. You know the version of me that agrees with everything you say. You haven't even tried to get to know the real me. Blake sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed his face. Ashley, what are you talking about? We're together every day. Being together and knowing each other are two different things. He was silent for a long time. Okay, he said finally. If it's that important to you, give it a try. But if it affects our budget, or Ethan. It won't, I interrupted. I guarantee it. The next day, I called the beauty school. Evening classes cost $800 per semester. It seemed like an astronomical amount, but I had already calculated that if I took extra shifts at Fresh Mart and saved everything I earned above my normal pay, I could pay for it in 2 months. Mom, Ethan asked when I picked him up from school, what is a beauty school? It's a place where people learn to do beautiful hairstyles. To cut hair, dye it. Will you do my hair? I laughed. Of course, if you want. Dad too? Blake is practically bald. He cuts his hair once a month with a No. 2 clipper. Maybe Dad too. On the first day of class, I was as nervous as if I were taking an exam. I got in the car at 6 in the evening when Blake came home from work. He kissed me goodbye, but there was tension in the kiss. Good luck, he said, but his voice didn't sound convincing. The beauty school was located in a shopping mall between a sportswear store and a Chinese restaurant. There were 25 students, mostly women with a few men. Our teacher, Glenda Richmond, had lush red hair and painted nails. Hairdressing isn't just about cutting hair, she told us on the first day. It's psychology. When people come to you, they entrust you not only with their hair, but also with their mood, their self-confidence. Next to me sat a girl named Tara, about 22 years old with short dark hair and tattoos on her arms. Where are you from? She asked me during the break. From here, from the city. And you? I moved from Atlanta last year. I broke up with my husband and decided to start over. What do you mean, start over? Tara laughed. Don't you know? Well, when you realize that the life you're living isn't really yours, and you decide to change it. I drove home with my head full of new thoughts. Blake and Ethan were watching a cartoon in the living room. Well? Blake asked without looking up from the screen. Good. Interesting. What were you doing there? Studying hair structure and scalp types, the basics of colorimetry. Ethan turned to me. What's colorimetry? It's the science of colors. It's about which colors suit a person and which don't. What color suits me? Warm colors suit you. Yellow, orange, red. Like my truck? Exactly. In the 3rd week of the course, Glenda announced that we would start practicing on real people, on mannequins, and then on volunteers. Who wants to be a model? She asked. Nothing complicated, just a haircut and styling. Tara raised her hand. I'm in. I need a haircut anyway. I watched her sit down in the hairdresser's chair and suddenly realized I want the same thing. I want to trust someone with my hair, my appearance. I want to take a risk. Can I be next? I asked. Of course. Glenda smiled. What do you want to change? I looked at myself in the mirror. Long blonde hair that I hadn't cut in 5 years. Always tied back in a ponytail or a bun because it's more practical. I want something new, I said. Something that doesn't look like me right now. The haircut took an hour. I watched the long strands fall to the floor and felt like I was shedding my old skin. When Tara finished, she turned out to be very talented. I didn't recognize myself in the mirror. My hair now reached my shoulders, was fuller, and had more shape. My face looked younger, my eyes bigger. You look incredible, Tara said. When I got home, Blake was standing in the kitchen heating up pizza. He turned around, saw me, and froze with the plate in his hands. My God, he said, do you like it? He looked at me for a long time, and I couldn't tell what I was reading in his eyes. You look like a different person. Is that bad? I don't know, he said honestly. It's just unusual. Ethan ran out of the living room and stopped dead in his tracks. "Mom, you cut your hair." "Yes, sweetie, do you like it?" He walked around me, looking at me from all sides. "You look like a cartoon princess, only a real one." Over the next 2 months, I radically changed my daily routine. 3 evenings a week, classes 2 evenings, extra shifts at the store, and suddenly I realized that I wasn't just living for others. At class, I met not only Tara, but also Jessica, a divorced mother of 2, and Mark, a middle-aged man who wanted to open his own salon. We started meeting for coffee after class, discussing techniques and sharing plans. "You know," Jessica said to me one evening, "you're completely different from when you started the course." "In what way?" "Back then you apologized all the time, for everything. Now you say what you think." She was right. I had indeed stopped apologizing automatically. At work, when customers complained about the long line, I would say, "I understand that this is inconvenient," instead of, "I'm sorry." At home, when Blake reproached me for coming home late from class, I would respond, "Class ended at 9," instead of, "I'm sorry I was late." "Mom has become more confident," Ethan said during one of our sessions with Dr. Walsh. "How do you feel about that?" she asked. "Fine. Now she doesn't get upset when I tell the truth." Blake sat silently beside us. Lately, he had become more withdrawn, but less anxious. The new smoke detector did go off less often, and when it did, we followed the plan without panicking. "What about you, Blake?" Dr. Walsh asked him. "How do you feel about the changes in Ashley?" He thought for a long time. "It was hard at first. I was used to her always agreeing with me. Now she has her own opinion on everything." "Is that bad?" "No, it's just different. I have to think more about what I say. Before, I could say anything, and Ashley would just agree. Now she can argue back. How does that affect you?" "It makes me want to be a better version of myself," he said unexpectedly. "When you know your wife won't agree with any nonsense, you start to think more carefully about what you say." At the end of the semester, we had our final exam, a full haircut and styling on a live model. I asked Tara to be my model, and I was Jessica's model. "Ready to go blonde?" Jessica asked as she prepared the dye. "Ready," I replied without hesitation. When I came home with light brown, almost blonde hair, Blake just hugged me. "You're happy," he said. "I haven't seen you this happy in a long time." "I am happy." Ethan stroked my hair. "Mom, are you a real hairdresser now?" "I'm a real hairdresser, sweetheart. I even have a certificate." That night, as Ethan was going to bed, he said, "You know what, Mom? I like that you've changed. You're more like your true self, my true self." A 5-year-old understood what I hadn't understood for years. A year later, I stood in front of the mirror at Elegant Salon, combing the hair of Mrs. Johnson, an elderly woman who had been coming to me every 2 weeks for 6 months. My hands moved confidently, automatically, while my mind was preoccupied with the offer I had received yesterday. "Dear," said Mrs. Johnson, looking at me in the mirror, "you seem preoccupied today." "Just thinking a lot," I replied, continuing to style her hair. "What about?" "Would you like to share with an old lady?" I smiled. Over the past year, I had learned to talk to clients, listen to their stories, and give advice. It turned out that Tara was right. The hairdresser's chair really is a place for psychotherapy. "I've been offered a partnership here at the salon." Mrs. Johnson jumped up. "My goodness, that's wonderful. What do you think?" "I don't know. It means investing money, taking on responsibility, and I have a family." "What does your family think?" I fell silent. Blake didn't know about the offer yet. I was afraid to tell him, although I didn't understand why. We had changed so much over the past year. The salon owner, Karen Mitchell, a 45-year-old woman with intelligent gray eyes, offered me a chance to become a co-owner for $20,000. It's a lot of money, but not astronomical. I had a steady clientele and brought in a good profit for the salon. "Think about it," she said yesterday. "You have talent and drive, and most importantly, people love you." It was true. After a year of working at the salon, I realized that I had found my calling. When I cut hair, dyed it, and did hairstyles, I felt like myself. Not Blake's wife, not Ethan's mom, just Ashley. In the evening, as we sat down to dinner, I finally gathered the courage to speak up. "I have news," I said. Blake and Ethan looked up from their plates. "What news?" Ethan asked. "I've been offered a stake in the salon." "To become a partner." Blake put down his fork. "Seriously?" "Yes. Karen says I'm ready and that it would be a good investment." "How much does it cost?" $20,000. Blake whistled. "Ashley, we don't have $20,000. "I know, but we can take out a loan, or ... quote. I took a deep breath. "We could sell your motorcycle." He looked at me as if I had suggested selling Ethan. "The motorcycle?" "Blake, you've been working on it for 3 years, but you haven't finished it. And when you do finish it, you still won't ride it. You're afraid of anything that might be dangerous." It was cruel, but fair. The motorcycle was a dream Blake would never dare to fulfill. "It's my therapy," he said quietly. "I know. But maybe it's time to find a new therapy, one that will bring us money, not take it away." Ethan looked at us with wide eyes. "What's a partner?" he asked. "It's when you own a business with someone else," I explained, "like when you play on the same team with a friend." "Will you be the boss?" "No, sweetie. I'll be a co-owner. That means I'll own part of the salon." Blake was silent, twirling a glass of water in his hands. "I need to think about it," he finally said. The next day, he went to the garage right after work and stayed there until late at night. I didn't bother him. Over the past year, I had learned to give people space to think. When he came into the bedroom, I was reading a book on business planning that I had borrowed from the library. "Do you really want this?" he asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I really want it." "What if it doesn't work out? What if you lose money? What if it does work out? What if I earn a lot more than I do now?" He lay next to me in the dark, and I could hear him breathing. "You know what scares me the most?" he finally said. "What?" "That you'll become so successful and independent that you won't need me anymore." I turned to him. "Blake, I don't want you to need me out of desperation. I want us to be together because we choose to be together." "What if I don't choose you?" "Then I won't choose you," I said simply. "But for now, I choose you every day despite all our problems and difficulties." He was silent for a long time. "I'll sell the motorcycle," he said finally. A week later, the Harley was in the yard with a "for sale" sign on it. Blake valued it at $15,000, less than he had spent on parts, but enough for my down payment on the salon. "Aren't you sorry?" I asked, watching him wipe the chrome for the last time. "I am," he said honestly, "but less than I expected to be." Maybe Dr. Walsh was right. Sometimes you have to let go of the things that keep you in the past. The motorcycle was bought by a young guy from a neighboring town for $13,500. We took out a bank loan for the rest of the money. On the day I signed the contract with Karen, I woke up with butterflies in my stomach. Blake kissed me before leaving for work. "Be proud of yourself," he said, "no matter what happens." Ethan hugged my legs. "Mom, when you become the salon manager, can I come visit you?" "Of course, sweetheart. You'll be my most important guest." The signing ceremony lasted half an hour. I signed a stack of documents, handed Karen a check, and suddenly realized I was a co-owner of a business at 26 years old. "Happy birthday to your new life," Karen said, raising a glass of champagne. The first few months of the partnership turned out to be harder than I expected. I had to keep records, plan purchases, and resolve conflicts between the craftsmen. I worked 12 hours a day and came home exhausted. "Maybe it was a mistake," I said to Blake one evening when Ethan was already asleep. "I'm not sure I can handle all this." "How do you feel when you work?" he asked. I thought about it. "Alive," I finally replied, for the first time in many years. Alive. "Then keep going. We'll manage." And we did manage. Blake took on more household chores. He started making dinner and helping Ethan with his homework. He even signed up for anger management classes, not because we made him, but because he wanted to be a better person. Ethan blossomed in this new environment. He made friends at school and started playing soccer in a youth league. His teacher, Miss Rodriguez, said he had become more open and confident. Do you know what he said to me yesterday? She told me during a parent-teacher conference, "My mom owns a salon and my dad is the best mechanic in the world, and they've learned not to yell at each other." 6 months after the partnership began, the salon started to generate a steady profit. Karen and I hired another technician and expanded our range of services. My income tripled compared to my job at Freshmart. "You know," Blake said one day at breakfast, "I've been thinking about making a change too." "In what way?" "My boss is offering me a promotion to senior mechanic, more responsibility, but also a higher salary." "That's great. Why are you hesitating?" "Because it means managing people, and I'm not sure I can do it." I put my hand on his. "A year ago, you weren't sure you could talk to me without yelling. And now look, we're talking like normal people." He smiled. "You're right. Maybe it's time to take a chance." In the fall, when Ethan turned 6, we decided to throw him a real party. Previously, his birthdays had been modest, a cake at home, gifts from us. "Can I invite my friends from school?" Ethan asked. "Of course," I said. "Who would you like to invite?" He named 5 names, and I realized that my son really did have friends. Not just 1 or 2 acquaintances, but a real group of friends. We rented a room at the bowling club and ordered pizza and cake. 9 children came with their parents, and our quiet Ethan was the center of attention, happy and laughing. "Look at him," Blake said, standing next to me. "He's so happy." "We're all happy," I replied. When the party was over, we drove home with a tired but satisfied Ethan. He fell asleep in the car, hugging his new toy, a Lego set his friends had given him. "Where's your truck?" I asked as we carried him to bed. "It's at home," he mumbled sleepily. "It doesn't have to go everywhere with me. It knows I'll be back." Blake and I exchanged glances. It was a big change. Ethan was no longer afraid to let go of his security toy. Late that night, after our son was asleep, we sat in the kitchen drinking tea. "You know," I said, "sometimes I think about the day I got that call from school." "And what do you think?" "That it was the best call of my life." Blake raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "You were panicking." "Because I didn't understand what was happening. But now I understand. That call forced us to look at ourselves honestly, to see what we were doing to our family. And what were we doing? Hiding the truth, even from each other. Ethan was afraid to say he was scared. You were ashamed of your panic, and I completely forgot who I was." Blake nodded. "And now?" "Now we know each other, for who we really are, with all our fears, dreams, and problems. And you like that? The real us?" I looked at the man, tired after a day's work, with oil under his fingernails, new wrinkles around his eyes. He was no longer the prince from a fairy tale that he had seemed to me at 19, but he had become something better, a real person. "Yes," I said, "I like it very much." Rain began to fall outside the window, and somewhere far away in the house, a smoke detector beeped quietly. A test signal. We both heard it, but neither of us tensed up or jumped out of our seats. "We'll have to replace the battery," Blake said calmly. "Tomorrow," I replied just as calmly. We finished our tea and went to bed. In the bedroom, I looked in the mirror at my new haircut, at my face, which finally expressed what I was feeling inside. 26 years old, my own business, a husband who was becoming a better version of himself, a son who wasn't afraid to speak the truth. It wasn't a perfect life like in the movies. It was something better. Real life. Before going to bed, I went to Ethan's room. He was sleeping with his arms outstretched, and next to him on the nightstand was a red truck. It was no longer a lifeline in an ocean of fears. Now it was just the favorite toy of a boy who knew that home was a safe place. I kissed him on the forehead and quietly left the room. Tomorrow would be a new day, with new challenges and opportunities. But today we were happy. Not perfectly, not forever, but truly happy. and that was enough.